Hi everyone, in this video we are going to start with attributions. Hyder and Kelly say that people act like naive scientists. They make causal attributions. Basically, that means you decide what causes someone's behavior. You attribute the cause to something. Causal attribution. And attribution theory is the idea that people either make a dispositional attribution or a situational attribution. If you are making a dispositional attribution, you are saying the cause of this behavior is internal to the person. It's just who they are, it's their disposition. If you make a situational attribution, you are saying the environment, the social context, caused them to act in this way. And so fundamental attribution error is our human tendency to overestimate dispositional factors relative to situational influences when explaining others' actions. That's a fancy way of saying when you're thinking about other people, not yourself, you make too many dispositional attributions and not enough situational attributions. So for example, an experiment done by, oh wait, hold on, it's not there. I will write the name in here. Done by Ross, Amabile, and Steinmetz. What they did was they had participants who were randomly assigned to either create questions for a quiz game, like a Jeopardy type game, or be the participant for the game, answer the questions. And the people who were chosen to ask the questions, the quiz master, were told to think of hard questions that they knew the answer to. And so they asked the questions, the participants would answer, and on average, the participants got about 40% of the questions right. They were hard. Afterwards, the participants who were the participants in the game, the ones who were the quiz masters, as well as other participants who were just observers to the game, were all asked, how smart do you think the participants are? How smart do you think the quiz masters are? Everyone, when thinking about themselves for the participants in the game and the quiz masters, said, I'm just as smart as everyone else. However, for the people answering the questions, those participants, they thought the quiz masters were smarter than average. And the observers rated the quiz masters as smarter than average. Oh, let me get my dog in. So the observers and the game participants thought the quiz masters were smarter than average. This is that fundamental attribution error. When they were attributing the cause for why the quiz masters knew all the answers, they made a dispositional attribution. They know all the answers because they are really smart people. They didn't make a situational attribution. They didn't say they knew all the answers because they were told to think of the questions that were hard. They didn't think that. They thought it's just who they are. They're just naturally smart. So that is that fundamental attribution error. And so we make situational and dispositional attributions about our successes and our failures as well. When we do well at something, when we bomb something. And this turns into our explanatory style. It affects our sense of control and our emotional well-being. So your explanatory style, do you tend to make situational or dispositional attributions about your successes and failures? If you have a pessimistic explanatory style, you think that the cause of the problem permeates your life. It's everywhere. It can't be changed. It's dispositional. If you have an optimistic style, then when something bad happens, there's a situational cause. It is the situation, and you can control it. You can change it, so next time this bad thing won't happen. This can help feed into the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when we act on our initial attribution of our behavior and then behave in a way to confirm it. So if you have a pessimistic style, this is just the way it is, it's never going to change. If you decide that you are not good at taking tests, and you think, I am going to not do well on my first test in social psych because I'm just bad at tests, that is now this dispositional attribution. And so what are you going to do? You're not going to study as hard, because why waste the time? You're going to fail the test anyways. And so that means you're probably going to fail the test. That is that self-fulfilling prophecy. Your initial assumptions, your initial attributions, you act in a way to make those actually turn out to be true. The same thing can go for the optimistic side too, though. If you think, you know what, I've done not so great in the past maybe, but it's because I didn't study enough, it's because that it was just an off day for me. If I work hard, if I study a lot, I'm going to do well on this test. What are you going to do? You're going to work hard. You're going to study a lot, which means you probably will do well on the test. So your assumptions cause you to act in a way that makes those assumptions true. This is not just for your own behavior, though. This is also for the behavior of others. So the Bloomer experiment was done by Rosenthal and Jacobson. And what they did was they used elementary school kids, 2nd through 5th grade, and they gave them all IQ tests. And then they just randomly chose 30% of the kids and told their teachers their IQ scores, how they did on this test, shows that they have a lot of potential to do really well this semester. Like, they're going to see significant gains in their IQ. But, you know, again, randomly chosen. Their IQ test did not say this. It was totally chance if their teachers got told this. But then they gave the kids IQ tests again at the end of the school year, and what did they find? The ones whose teachers had been told they are bloomers, they're going to do well, they had the largest IQ gains, especially in the lower grades, especially in 2nd grade. That is that self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the teachers assumed they were going to succeed, those teachers acted in such a way that those kids did succeed. Another effect that context can have is on our social judgments. So a basic principle of social cognition is that all judgments are relative. How we perceive and how we think about people or situations depend on the social context. So a few definitions connected with this. One is contrast effect. This is a change in how good something looks to you in contrast to a similar item. For example, if you are going to the store to buy a bag of cookies, and there is one bag for $1, one bag for $5, and one bag for $10, you are probably going to buy the $5 bag, because $10 for a bag of cookies, too much. $1, they might not taste so good. $5 seems reasonable. But if you go to the store and there are 3 different prices and there are cookies for $1, $1.50, or $5, you're not going to buy the $5 cookies. You're going to buy the cookies that are $1.50, because you're going to think, oh my goodness, $5 is so much, in contrast to what the other prices are. It's going to seem less reasonable because all of a sudden it's the highest instead of being in the middle. You're comparing it to $1 and $1.50, not to $1 and $10. This is also why, like, if you go to Costco, they put $2,000 TVs in the front. Then it seems totally reasonable to spend $10 on an enormous bag of chips you don't need, because it's not $2,000. Another related concept is social comparison. It's the process by which, let me fix that, the process by which we evaluate our abilities, achievements, attitudes, and other attributes by comparing ourselves to others. Depending on how we compare ourselves, it can be informative, it can be comforting, or it can be depressing and deflating. And so ways that we do social comparison right now, a lot of it is social media in our current environment. So how you compare to the people that you follow on social media or your friends on social media. And Lubomirsky says that the happiest people evaluate themselves by looking at their own internal standards of success, not paying attention to other people. But Carol Dweck says that there is a way to use social comparison and to not get depressed. If you have a growth mindset, and a growth mindset is the belief in the human ability to grow and the commitment to self-improvement. If you have a growth mindset where difficult things are just challenges to overcome, not roadblocks, then seeing other people's successes can be inspiring because it's something you think you could achieve yourself. So there is some debate. It kind of goes into your own thinking while you're making that social comparison on whether or not it is healthy or deflating. For schemas and primacy, schemas are mental models of the world. It's how we organize and retrieve information. Again, remember, we're cognitive misers. Schemas help you make these decisions faster. Examples of schemas are things like stereotypes, attitudes, expectations, and schemas can be activated through priming, which is the use of subtle cues that direct our thinking. For example, an experiment that was done by Higgins, Rolls, and Jones was, they took the participants and they told them they were participating in 2 studies. It was really just one big study. They said that it was on perception and reading comprehension. They were lied to. So the first part, they were asked to remember whether certain traits were positive or negative. So remember these words, talkative, adventurous, stubborn. Are these positive or negative things? Then 5 minutes later, they read an ambiguous story about Donald, who did things that could be seen as either positive or negative. So this was the reading comprehension part. And they were asked, tell me about the story about Donald. The people who in the first part had read a lot of words, had been asked to remember words that were more negative, remembered or interpreted Donald's story in a more negative light. The ones who had been asked to remember positive traits in the first part interpreted the same story in a more positive light. So, for example, he goes skydiving. Is that adventurous or is that reckless? He takes time to get ready in the morning. Is that conceited or is that self-confident? He likes to make decisions on his own. Is that being independent or is that being aloof? How they interpreted the story, what schema they used, was based on that priming, whether they had been thinking about positive or negative traits in the first part. So that is priming with schemas, and it can affect how you can interpret a situation, how you respond. The next thing we're going to go over are heuristics. And for heuristics, oh wait, you know what? I forgot primacy effect. Sorry. Primacy effect is when early information has an influence on later information. So it's more likely when the information, the later information you have is ambiguous. So the early information affects how you interpret what happens later. So ambiguous information in the later part, more likely to be affected by this primacy effect. An experiment that was done for this by Jones's research group. What they did was they had participants watch someone take an IQ test with 30 items. All the testers got 15 out of 30 on the test, everyone that took it. But half of the time, the participants who were looking at someone take the test and then reviewing the score, the person who was taking the test did really well at the beginning and then sort of did horribly at the end of the test. And the other group, they started off doing not so great and then did really well for the second half of the test. The participants who saw someone start off well rated that person as smarter than the participants who saw someone start a test not so great and then do well at the end. Even though all the participants got the same score, 15 out of 30, they were affected by the early information. Did they do well at the beginning of the test or did they do poorly? That affected how they interpreted their overall IQ. So that is the primacy effect. Okay, so now heuristics. Heuristics are mental operations that provide rules of thumb that guide problem solving and making judgments. This, again, think about that cognitive miser thing. This is that automatic processing, not conscious, just think of something fast because you don't have time, you don't have the energy, you don't have the resources to make a really studied decision. There are a couple of different types that you need to know. One type is representativeness heuristic. This is when you focus on surface similarities to make inferences. So for example, in one experiment, people were asked to rate how healthy cereals were. Natural granola was rated as healthier than Lucky Charms. They did not bother to look at the nutritional details, which would have showed that the Lucky Charms actually had more nutrients. The granola stunted the growth of rats who thrived on the Lucky Charms. They weren't focusing on actually looking at the details. They just went with what matches the image of healthy cereal in my head. That would be all natural granola, not Lucky Charms. For the representative heuristic, we tend to focus on the positive aspects when making a decision. So, for example, if you have to, oh goodness, what's a good example of this? If you have to have a surgery, if the doctor is talking about the risks of the surgery and she says, you have a 95% chance of surviving the surgery, you're more likely to go for it. If they say you have a 5% chance of dying, you're less likely to go for the surgery. Technically, it's the same thing, but when you are thinking in your head what matches a good outcome, what sounds safe, we're going to focus on the positive, the 95% success rate. We're going to go for that. If you're focusing on the negative, again, we try to avoid risk, that negative framing, then you are going to say, no, thank you, I do not want this. Not going to happen. So that is the representativeness heuristic, or representative heuristic. The availability heuristic is our tendency to predict the likelihood of an event on how easy it is to bring specific examples to mind. The easier it is to think of an example, the more common you think it is. For example, oh gosh, what's a good example? Oh, at the beginning of COVID, big lockdown, I knew a 6-year-old who got COVID and had one of those autoimmune responses. She was hospitalized for a while. She almost went blind. It was just almost needed a liver transplant. It was just horrible. And so even though, like, let's be honest, young children tend to do fairly well. Young children, least likely to die from COVID, least likely to have a severe case and be hospitalized. But because I had heard about this girl who got hospitalized and almost died, I was so careful with my kids because I was sure if they got COVID, they were going to be seriously ill. That could happen to them. In my mind, it was more likely because I could easily think of a case of a kid the same age as my son who got really sick and almost died from COVID. And so I was hyper careful. My kids didn't get COVID for over 2 years, and so they were vaccinated by the time they did, and it was like a little cold. But at the beginning, when I think how likely is it someone's going to get sick who's a little kid, I can think of a case, I think it's going to be really common. That's that availability heuristic. People think that shark attacks are much more likely right after Shark Week because they've heard lots of cases of shark attacks. So in their mind, they think it, like if they go to the water, they're going to get attacked. That's that availability heuristic. And priming can increase the images that are available in our mind for the availability heuristic. So for example, like watching a week of Shark Week, right after that, you're more likely to think shark attacks are very common. If you watch a lot of crime dramas on TV, you're more likely to overestimate the crime rate. It's easy for you to think of instances of crime, even if it's fake crime on TV, and so you think that crime is very common. Another way this can work out is the more familiar you are with a statement or an idea, the more available it is to you. So the more you hear it, the more likely you are to think it is true. So if you hear a statement repeatedly, even if it's a total lie, it's more familiar and you think it's true. So for example, if you know someone who thinks that Trump won the 2020 election, that there was so much voter fraud, that he should have been the rightful winner, that it was not legitimate, that Biden only won because of fraud. That is that availability heuristic. If you hear, my assumption is if you think that, you are listening and consuming a lot of conservative media, listening to a lot of political rallies from conservative people who believe that. And so if you hear it a lot, you think it's true. You're like, yeah, this is the truth. This isn't a lie. Even though it's totally a lie. There's no proof. It didn't happen. But if you hear it over and over again, it's really easy to think it's true. It feels true to you, even though it's not, because you hear it over and over again. So that's why so many people can believe and think there must be facts out there. I've heard it so much, it must be true. It's availability heuristic. It's not actually true. The next one is affect heuristic. Affect heuristic is when we tap into our feelings to shape our views of people's ideas. Like, I just had this gut feeling sort of idea. If you're in a good mood when you meet someone, you like them more. You think they're a good person. If you're in a bad mood when you meet someone, you don't like the person as much. Your mood affects how you interpret this person, how you think they are. And so an experiment done with this that actually connects to halo effect. So halo effect is related to this affect heuristic. This is a bias in which a favorable or unfavorable feeling colors specific inferences and future expectations about a person. So if you have a good feeling about them, you're going to assume good things about them. If you have a bad feeling or opinion of someone, you're going to assume negative things. An experiment that was done with this by Pratt Canis was with Reagan, President Reagan, back in the 80s, before you were born. And Reagan went to Eureka College. And participants in this experiment were asked which statement was true. Whether Reagan had an A average when he was at Eureka College, or if Reagan never had above a C average at Eureka College. And so for this experiment, the participants who liked Reagan supporters, thought the true statement was that he always had an A average. The people who did not like President Reagan were more likely to be the ones who thought he never got above a C average. That is that halo effect. They liked him. They thought, of course, he's smart. Of course, he did well. They didn't like him. Of course, he was a mediocre student. And so question for you. Can you think of another example of priming and the availability heuristic, or I'll add on to this, halo effect with the availability heuristic? Next thing we are going to go over is memory. And by the way, this is the last thing to go over for this chapter. And ignore my daughter playing with my dogs in the background. For this, constructive prediction. Let me talk about that first. Constructive prediction is when you're predicting how certain things will feel to us. That prediction determines the goals we will set and the risks we're willing to take. So if we think something will be good, we are more likely to try it and we're more likely to take risks to get it. Now, with this constructive prediction, one problem is that we tend to overestimate the emotional impact of future events and how long these reactions will last. So we think that, if we buy this new car, we're gonna love it. Life will be so much better. Your life's not gonna be that much different a year later. You overestimate how much this choice you make. If I win the lottery, if I take this job, if I choose this college, we tend to mess up thinking how much this will impact us later on. Why does this happen? There are two reasons. One, we fail to recognize our power of adjusting to happy or unhappy events when we are mentally constructing our future. So yes, winning the lottery might help us in the short term, but how much of an impact is it really going to have 5 years later? If something bad happens, if we get in a horrible car accident, yes, in the short term that will really impact us. It might not necessarily have a huge impact later on. Number two, we tend to focus only on the event in question and not all the other things that will occur at the same time. So this one really positive thing, what about everything else that's happening in your life that's maybe not so positive? This one negative thing, what about all the other potentially good things that are happening about the same time? We focus solely on that one thing and we ignore everything else. So we're not very good at predicting how much something is going to impact us. So we sort of imagine our future at this abstract level, and we care more about how desirable an outcome is than how likely it actually is. And then for constructive and autobiographical memory, our memories are really influenced by what we are thinking about the events in the present and not what actually happened in the past. So our current beliefs and environment affect how we remember things that happened in our past. This is that reconstructive memory. So suggestive questioning, how we're thinking about things now, can influence our memories, or even things like eyewitness testimony. Loftus did an experiment connected with this. Loftus and Palmer worked together on this. They did an experiment where people watched a video of a car crash, and they were asked, how fast do you think the cars were going how fast do you think this one car was going when it smashed into the other car? Some people were asked, how fast was the car going when it hit the other car? Some people were asked, how fast was it going when it made contact with the other car? So they were asked this question in different ways. And so they'd say, this is how fast I thought it was going. And then a week later, they were brought back in and they were asked, that video you saw last week, did you see any broken glass at the scene? If they had been asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, they were more likely to remember broken glass that was not actually there. If they had been asked how fast were the cars going when they made contact, they were less likely to remember broken glass. So the question influenced how they remembered it. You're also more likely to recall memories that confirm your beliefs or views about the world. This is basically an example of confirmation bias. For example, what's an example? If you thought that your parents were mean, then when you think back on your childhood, you're more likely to remember the times they grounded you or they were mean to you. You're not going to remember the happy times because that doesn't confirm your idea that they were mean parents. If you think your parents were nice, you're less likely to remember when you got grounded, when they were mean. You're going to remember the good times, when they bought you ice cream, whatever it was, because that confirms it. That confirms what you think. And so this changing of memories, it's not just for other events, it's about your autobiographical memories as well, your own personal memories. And then final leftist experiment connected with this, talking about changing autobiographical memories, reconstructing a memory. She had participants write down like short diary entries about things that happened in their childhood. And then she asked their families, like, did this person ever get lost in a mall? None of them had been lost in a mall when they were a kid. But she inserted a fake diary entry into these journals about getting lost in the mall. And then every night, the participants read their journal. 2 weeks later, after doing this, out of the 24 participants, 6 now remembered being lost in a mall. They had an autobiographical memory from their childhood about getting lost in a mall, even though it didn't happen. And they were adding extra details that weren't even in that fake journal entry, like the shirt of the person who brought them to the main office to be, reunited with their parents. They were adding these extra details to this false memory. Totally never happened. As far as they were concerned, though, it looked exactly like the real memory. So our memories can be influenced by our assumptions, but also by misinformation. And that is it for this video.